Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 129, part 2, Armageddon 2001. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session as we continue our look at the 1991 DC event, Armageddon 2001. In part 1, I looked at the premise behind Armageddon 2001. I also looked at the plan that DC had for publishing this story. And I synopsized the first chapter of Armageddon 2001 before looking at 2 of the 12 summer annuals, which made up the main body of the Armageddon 2001 event. So I'm going to start off this part of the episode by looking at a few more of the annuals that made up the main body of this narrative. And I'm going to start off by looking at Detective Comics Annual number 4. Wave Rider not only took fascination with Superman, but he also took a fair degree of fascination with Batman, even though he had scanned Batman once already and seen that while Batman did face a very dark future, his convictions, his sense of right and wrong were so strong that even though he was at a possible breaking point, he still did not become the monarch. Well, once again, Wave Rider decides to scan Batman, and this time he sees a very different timeline in which Tim Drake does not become a state senator. Rather, he goes away to Europe while Bruce Wayne continues to fight the good fight as Batman. And 10 years into this potential future, Batman takes down Ra's al Ghul once and for all. He manages to keep Ra's from living long enough to be immersed in a Lazarus pit and be renewed. But the victory comes with a heavy cost, as Batman's body is brutally beaten. Tim Drake comes back from Europe and assists an aged Alfred in recovering Bruce Wayne, who's both physically and psychologically shattered to the point where Bruce actually gives up being the Batman. It's not just that his body has been broken past the point that it can be suitably repaired. Bruce Wayne's spirit is just broken, and he's talking about how his successor, i.e. Tim, is still not ready. He's not good enough to become the Batman. He lacks the obsession that Bruce used to have. Well, Commissioner Gordon shines the bat signal, and it's Tim Drake who dons the Robin costume once more and pays a visit to Commissioner Gordon, where he has to deliver the sad news to the Commissioner that the Batman is not physically dead, but for all intents and purposes, he is dead. And this crushes the Commissioner. Tim goes back to the Batcave and talks with Bruce and then with Alfred before making the decision to don the Batsuit himself. And in his only night out as the new Batman, Tim is killed by Talia al Ghul's men. And word reaches Bruce, and this crushes his spirit even further, but it also lights something of fire underneath him. And so he decides that he's going to take the cybernetics program, which he used to build an exoskeleton for Alfred, and Bruce is going to turn himself into pretty well a cyborg. So he undergoes the process, and kudos to the art team for showing that when he puts the bat suit on over top of his now cybernetic body, you can see that Batman is no longer completely human. He is part machine. And it's quite painful for him to operate with these cybernetic parts. It puts a great strain on his heart. But after showing the people of Gotham that he is back, Batman goes after Talia and her men. Certainly with a great deal of vengeance in his heart. And this is pretty well his last stand, taking down Talia and her forces. And Talia explains that she did this all to light that fire under Batman so that he would come to her, so that she could take him and put him in the Lazarus pit and restore him. And this is a point at which Wave Rider becomes quite concerned that Batman might actually become the Monarch, because if he goes into that Lazarus pit and is restored, he'll be restored physically, but mentally he could come out with a mindset that leads him to augment his cybernetic pieces and become the Monarch. But in the end, Wave Rider sees that this does not happen. Batman does not become the Monarch. And so Wave Rider sets his sights once again. I'm not going to talk about these annuals here, but just to let you folks know that there was a Hawkworld annual in which Wave Rider investigated the Hawks. There was a Flash annual in which Wave Rider scans Wally West. There's a Legion 91 annual where Wave Rider looks into the futures for both Dox and Lady Quark. There's a humorous JLA annual where Wave Rider has one could say the misfortune of having to scan the features of Guy Gardner, Fire, Blue Beetle, and company. But he comes back to scan Superman in the Action Comics annual. And Wave Rider learns an important lesson from scanning Superman a second time. In this timeline, Jonathan Kent dies when he's run over by one of his pieces of farming machinery. And so a widowed Martha Kent watches as her son marries the love of his life, Lois Lane, and Lois and Clark take Martha in. Now we see that Intergang is still running at this time, and in one of their secret retreats, they are about to detonate the nuclear device. However, Superman shows up before they can arm the device and detonate it, so undoing the first future timeline that Wave Rider saw in the Superman annual. And Wave Rider muses to himself, this is incredible. Superman should not have remembered anything about the future timeline, which I saw when I first scanned him, but subconsciously he remembers something that happened, and so now he's prevented the destruction of Metropolis and the deaths of all those whom he loves. This is fascinating. I must explore this further. So we see Lois and Clark have a very happy marriage. They're very happy having Ma Kent living with them. And Clark's old friend, Pete Ross, comes to Clark and Lois one day and says, I'm running for president of the United States, and I want the two of you to be my campaign managers, which they agreed to do. And in the beginning, Clark makes sure to use his X-ray vision to scan the crowds, make sure that there are no malcontents in the audience at any public events such as televised debates, which Pete is taking part in. But by his own admission, Clark becomes complacent. And sadly, during one nationally televised debate, Clark does not use his X-ray vision. A gunman is present in the audience, and while Pete is speaking, the gunman opens fire. Now, Clark is able to jump in front of Pete and save Pete from receiving any mortal wounds, but he's not quite quick enough. And so Pete's injured to the point where it looks like he's going to have to drop out of the race. But what is more, the gunfire shreds Clark's suit, and we see the S-shield underneath. And so in front of a national television audience, in front of the live audience, Superman is revealed to be Clark Kent. Or rather, Clark Kent is revealed to be Superman. And this leads to Clark resigning his post at the Daily Planet. He and Lois visit Pete and his wife Lana in the hospital, and Pete says to Clark, look, you've got to keep up the fight for me. I need you to run for president in my place. And Clark considers it, and then he agrees. And so he announces his candidacy for presidency. And talk about life imitating art from decades past. Just as there was that whole nonsensical attempt by his opponents to prove that Barack Obama lacked proper U.S. citizenry in order to become the president, so here too in this story do we see Clark's political opponents questioning his American citizenship. And so there's a whole inquest. Star Labs is involved. They take Superman's birthing matrix, and they come to the conclusion that while Clark Kent is genetically Kryptonian, he was artificially conceived in the birthing matrix. The matrix did not open until it landed on Earth. So what that means is that for all intents and purposes, Clark Kent is a human, and on top of that, because the birthing matrix landed in Smallville, Kansas, Clark Kent, aka Superman, is an American citizen. And so we see Clark continue his political campaign. His chief opponent is Senator Forrest, who in the Superman annual was President Forrest, and Clark is able to destroy Forrest's credibility in a nationally televised debate. Turns out that Forrest is something of a crooked politician himself. And so when election night comes, Clark Kent wins by a landslide, and shortly thereafter, he is sworn in as President of the United States. And all goes quite well for Superman. He comes across as a man of peace. He comes across as somebody very proactive. He launches campaigns to find alternatives to fossil fuels. His plan is to send satellites into space that will help collect spatial energies, that will act as clean, renewable sources of energy. He works with other countries to bring about demilitarization, the disarmament of nuclear arms. But we get to a challenging point when it comes time for the U.S. to demilitarize, and Superman collects Batman and Wonder Woman, the members of the Justice League America and Justice League Europe, to talk about a plan going forward. And this is where a very hot-headed Guy Gardner steps forward and accuses President Superman of being a traitor, a turncoat, a pansy, and he assaults Superman. And Superman does appear to get quite angry, and he reaches out and he grabs Guy's right fist